First thing that's important is that my background is in philosophy. So I have approached parapsychology as a philosopher. And as a philosopher, I'm interested in what it means to be a person and interested in the philosophical implications of parapsychology. It turns out that parapsychological phenomena are interesting examples of virtually every philosophical problem that we face as philosophers. So one approach was the philosophical approach, trying to understand what parapsychology has to say about who I am as a person. But then also I have become interested in experimental aspects of parapsychology, and I've done a few experiments along the way. Well, that's probably more my experimental aspect. Philosophically, the last 20 years, I've become interested in cross-cultural concepts of self. Not only does parapsychology speak to the question of how I understand myself, but other cultures may. And in particular, I focused on the study of Australian Aboriginal culture. The single most significant parapsychological experiment actually took place with a subject who was an Australian Aborigine. But I have mainly focused upon the Balinese culture in the island of Bali. And I've worked with a psychiatrist there who understands and teaches meditation. And so we did what we call the cognitive D-Mills experiment, direct mental interaction on living systems. And what we're interested in asking is, can a person who is meditating in one room through intention have an effect on how well a person is meditating in another room? And we did some experiments which indicated that this probably could happen. Oh my goodness, I would say basketball, Masterpiece Theater, and if I really want to find out about the news, it's Stephen Colbert. Yeah, I suppose two things, really. One is, I think, what any parapsychologist would talk about. That is, what you ought to do is focus on a particular area of a discipline that comes out in what we would call normal science. And it could be any area. I am a philosopher. It could be in the social sciences. It could be in the natural sciences. So any particular area is okay. So come at parapsychology from the strength of that particular area, and also you're more likely to be able to get a job if you have that traditional degree. The second thing I would recommend is develop a research program. So it's really interesting to ask, there's so many interesting questions in parapsychology, so it's really interesting to start asking a series of questions and doing experiments in different areas. But if you want to help yourself become known in parapsychology, if you want to help the field of parapsychology, create a research program where you pick out a particular area that you're really interested in and do a series of experiments that brings light on that particular problem. After over 4 decades of working in parapsychology, I think that probably every question has been asked me, but one that hasn't been asked very often and takes advantage of those 40 years might be a question: how has parapsychology changed over those 40 years? How has it changed during that time that I have been involved? And I would say it's changed in a couple of ways. When I came into parapsychology in the early 70s, I think people were committed to the paradigm of J.B. Rhine, sort of the father of modern parapsychology, and who was a dualist. And the problem at that time was that, at least from a philosophical perspective, people wanted to interpret the person only as a material object. And J.B. Rhine argued that that is inadequate, that there is this thing called a mind. And for him, it really was a mental thing. I think that over 40 years, we have sort of moved away from that dualist position to more of what you could call a naturalist position, that parapsychological phenomena are not extra normal, but they are part of the normal world. But J.B. Rhine was right that that sort of focused reductive materialism was inadequate. And I would say the other thing that has happened is that almost everyone was interested in trying to prove parapsychology 4 days ago. They were trying to create experiments that showed, yes, it really did exist. I think now, both because we've amassed so much evidence and the fact that skeptics tend to be skeptics even in the face of evidence, people are much more interested in asking the question now: what sorts of correlates, psychological correlates, for instance, happen? What are the psychological circumstances? What are the physical circumstances that help produce ESP or PK, as well as what sort of physical theories might help us explain consciousness and parapsychological phenomena?